Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. So what I've got in front of me is some homemade compost. Now, a couple of months ago, my friend Erwin from where we are asked me, he was asking me a lot of questions about composting. And I was trying to answer the best I can on a live stream, and I was trying to answer in comments on my videos. So rather than give him some generic advice, I thought I'd give him a practical demonstration of how I compost and how I go through the composting process, and I end up with this material here. So if you look at that, that's just luscious organic matter. There's all kinds of insects in here. There's worms, baby worms in there. It's full of isopods, so woodlouse. They're all in there. They're everywhere. It's just full of life, absolutely jam-packed full of life, full of bacteria, full of little creatures that'll do your garden so good. And this is what fuels my garden. This is the stuff that fuels the garden. And then this is the stuff that I grow in. And on top of this is what I'll mulch with wood chips and let the wood chips break down and add continuous feed into the garden. So what's going to follow now is going to be the process of me starting the compost pile, exactly what I put into the compost pile. You'll see the ingredients. So if you look at the different type of worms that you can find in the compost pile. So you've got these tiger worms, you've got these ordinary earthworms, you've got the red wrigglers. Perfect. This compost pile is just full of life. So the process of the compost pile, it took me about 2 to 3 months, and the main ingredients were generated on my property. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to show you a practical guide of how to make compost. I didn't want to give you some generic information. I wanted to take you through the whole process from start to finish, so you can see exactly how a compost pile is made, what you have to do, when to turn it, how to treat a pile that gets too wet, and then take you through that process and generate the final product, and how we use the final product in the garden. On this property, my property isn't huge, and I can generate probably the 1 ton builder's sack bags. I can probably generate about 10 of those of finished compost a year without any trouble. If I was to buy that kind of material, I just couldn't afford it. Now, so what we do here is we use free materials, things that you can easily get hold of, and we'll just continue composting and making the compost piles. So I'll show you how we've gone through making the compost piles. Just keep watching and you'll learn how to do the composting a practical way and a convenient way without having to go to extreme amounts of trouble. And I'll talk you through each thing that's necessary for a compost pile as we go through. Now the first thing that I'm adding to my compost pile is a layer of semi-broken down wood chips, and I'm just layering them at the very bottom. There are this little bit of grass, don't worry about it. It's just some weeds and bits of grass that I pulled up a little bit ago and I've just chucked it on, so that's fine. I mean, normally what I do with my compost piles is I build them in a way where I'm composting as I'm going, so I'm adding as I'm going. I've never really got all the materials in one go, so I generally just prepare a layer, then prepare the next layer, then prepare the next layer. But today it's one of those lucky days where I've got pretty much everything that I need in one go. My pallet bins, compost bin, are just simply a few pallet staked in at the back, pallet staked in at the side, and a pallet staked in at that side. That bin is falling apart a bit. These pallets are quite old. I need to add some new pallets to the mix. So that's my first layer, and it's just a layer of semi-broken down wood chips. So it's a good idea whenever you have a brown layer to give it a good soaking. So I'm just going to take the hose pipe. I'd normally use grey water for this, but because this is a demonstration for Erwin, I'm just going to use the hose pipe. And then the next thing that I'm going to add are some grass clippings. See, on here there's dandelions, there's grass, there's weeds in there as well. I don't mind that at all. Don't add too many grass clippings in one go because it does tend to compact and tend to mat down, so just be careful with that. See, most of these hedge trimmings could go straight onto the compost heap. They're still quite tender, still quite young, but some of these brown bits, these will take quite a while to break down, especially things like this. So a top tip is whenever you compost, the smaller your particles, the faster it'll break down. So what I'm going to do with this is, if I zoom you out and show you what I've done, I've laid it out on the grass. I've laid all the hedge trimmings out on the grass. And now I'm just going to take the lawnmower and give it a quick blast with the lawnmower. So now that I've blended it, now that I've gone over it with the lawnmower, this is what it's turned into. As you can see, the particle size are really small now. The leaves have been chopped up, the twigs have been chopped up. This will break down in no time. There's a nice mix of grass in there, there's a nice mix of leaves in there, twigs, everything. Really small particle size. That'll break up in no time at all. And that'll be my green layer for the compost pile. After the grass clippings, the next thing that I'm going to add are all those privet clippings, so the hedge clippings that you saw me blend up with the lawnmower. So we're just going to add that. So these are the hedge trimmings that are blitzed up with the lawnmower. These are brilliant, especially when you blitz them up like this. It's got a good mix of grass, it's got a good mix of leaves, twigs. This will heat up in no time. As you can see, it's quite moist, so it doesn't need too much water. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to chuck on bits of cardboard. The recycle bin's full, so these are like cardboard that came, lolly boxes, boxes for fish fingers, anything like that. That's all going on. I've just licked it up a little bit, and that's going on. I first added a layer of browns, and then I added a layer of extremely high nitrogen green grass clippings, and then I added a mix of leaves from the hedge trimmings and twigs that I've blended up and grass. Now, so I've added a nice thick layer of greens in there. Now I'm going to add some more browns. So now the next layer that I'm going to add are stuff from the old compost pile that didn't break down. So there's a lot of wood chips in here, there's a lot of brown woody stalks. We'll just add that on like that. So the idea is to cover all the green material with the next layer of brown material. It's quite big, it's quite thick, it's quite chunky, so it'll take a long time for it to break down. So it'll probably go through my composting process 2 or 3 times before it fully breaks down. But that's fine, because what we do at each stage is I sift it down. But this compost pile will produce me compost in a matter of months. So just cover it up like that. Cover all this green stuff up at the front. And I'm not going to fully cover this front part up because I haven't put the front part on, just because it's easier for me to fill right now. Once it gets a little bit higher, I'll attach the front. The other thing that I've got now is I've got some more greens. Now this is just kitchen scraps. So there's bits of eggplant, onion eggshells, crush them up. Cabbages, lettuces, eggshells, potato peels, banana skins, tissue papers, stalk of a cauliflower, peppers, so all of those little bits, they can go in. That's nice, so that can all go in there. Give the eggshells a little bit of a crush, that'll help it go a little bit faster. I'll add some more grass clippings. I should have actually given that brown layer of water, so what I'm going to do before I add any more greens, just give it in good water. See, the brown layer, this is the layer that needs the water the most. The greens naturally have a lot of moisture inside it already. Now, you'll hear on a lot of composting videos that the compost pile should be as damp as a moist, wrung out sponge. Now, I don't know what wood feels like when it's like a moist, wrung out sponge. So what I say is it needs to be damp. It shouldn't be dripping with water, but it shouldn't look dry. So once you open the pile, it shouldn't look dry. So we'll give that a little pat. So, and with those grass clippings, what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to give it a little stir into that brown material, just so it doesn't mat down as much. See, if you ever find that grass clippings mat down when you put it into your compost pile, just do this. Just give it a little mix. You don't have to give it an extreme mix. Just a little mix into the brown pile. See, this kind of compost, hot compost, would work. You don't always have to layer it. Even if you just mixed it all up and put it, it'd still heat up. There's enough nitrogen and enough carbon in this pile for it to heat up. So I'll give it another blast with a hose pipe. It's surprising how much water the composting process does take. That's why it's important if you can use rainwater, if you can use grey water to feed the compost pile. You're not using the fresh water. I've got this hose pipe connected to my water butt, so all the runoff from the greenhouse, it just pumps in. But normally what I'd use is grey water for the compost. I use grey water for the compost pile, and I use grey water for the lawn. So that's more hedge trimmings. I haven't gone to the trouble of blitzing this up with a lawnmower. It's all quite small pieces anyway, so we'll just put that in. These are fresh, these are quite young, as you can see they're quite green. They're going to break down quite quickly. I would, if they were a bit tougher, then I would blitz them up with a lawnmower. Now I've just put the front of the compost bin back on. It's getting a bit high, so it's going to be a bit easier for me to... Now I'm going to pull all the material forward, make sure that I fill up the front of the compost bin as well. Top of the hedge trimmings, I'm adding more of the semi-broken down compost. The stuff that didn't break down the first time. There's even nettles in there, they go in fine. That's a nice green. See, for this brown layer, you could use anything like straw, you could use anything like leaves. These are the kind of wood chips, bits of wood that are rotting down. So that's all very brown. It'll take a long time for that to break down. It's probably been in the compost pile 2 or 3 times through the process, but it's starting to break down now. And once that breaks down, it's going to provide some really nice growing material. So we'll chuck all that in. So now that's covered with the broken down wood chips, well, the stuff from the old compost pile, I'm going to give it another soak. So this is what I'm using. So this is the first time that I'm building a compost pile where I've got all my material stored, because we just cut the grass for the front garden, and we cut the hedges from the front garden, and over the last week we've sifted this compost pile and we emptied it out. So there's all the stuff that was left that wasn't broken down, and that's what's going back on. There's a nice pile of grass clippings, and there's what's left of the hedge trimmings, so that's all going to go on. So if you've seen the wood chip piles that I've had in front of my house, so this is the pile from, it's probably about 3 months old. These wood chips have broken down quite a bit, but they haven't fully broken down. If it was autumn, I'd use this in the garden. So that's all those semi-broken down wood chips on there. Those are aged wood chips. So lay them out nice and flat. Now you'll hear some people say that you should build a compost pile from the inside out, so that the middle should be higher than the rest of it. Now I completely disagree with that, because I want this pile to cook as evenly as possible. If you make the middle part higher than the rest of it, what's going to happen is the middle's going to cook, but the sides aren't. Now with this, apart from the very edges, it's all going to cook. It'll cook quite nicely apart from the very edges, because that's the part that's not going to get the heat. Now these wood chips are quite dry, so we'll give them a good soak. The problem with using tap water for this kind of thing is you want bacteria to be building up in this, and because tap water contains a lot of chlorine to kill the bacteria, you're already setting yourself back by using chlorinated water to start off this pile. Add some more grass. And now we'll add some more of the semi-broken down, the old compost. You'll often hear that you shouldn't be adding citrus and onions to a compost pile. Now this type of compost pile is going to be a hot compost pile. Adding onions and citrus to this is not a problem at all. It's not a compost pile dependent on worms. Now citrus and onions cause a lot of irritation to worm skin. So if you're dependent on a compost pile that's dependent on worms, then you don't want to use too many citrus, and you don't want to use too much onions, because that'll cause irritation to the worms and they won't be happy. Now in this pile it's not a problem at all. Now the way I'd normally be doing this is, as I fill the compost pile up and as I generate kitchen scraps, I'd just be adding kitchen scraps to the pile. So this layer of material from the old compost pile, this contains it's mixed with a lot of wood chips, it's mixed with a lot of kitchen scraps, a lot of yard waste as well. So it's a good mix already. That's why you see me adding browns on top of this, what looks like a brown layer anyway. I'm not someone who has a lot of coffee grounds, so we don't have coffee grounds to add to this mix. There's a bit of controversy with coffee grounds. Now what I've quickly done is I've just scraped the top of the old compost pile over, because I want to show you what's going on in the old compost pile. Now this has, the stuff that I've scraped over has a lot of large material, a lot of stuff that's not broken down at all. So that's more of the leftovers from the old compost pile. Spread that out. It's a nice thick layer of that, because remember I scraped the top off the other compost pile onto this one. So give that another. Front's starting to wobble, so now I've got the rope. What I'll do is I'll tie it, so it's not a difficult way of tying it. So I'll just put a slip knot in it, and it'll be easier to take off.